Okay, so before the game comes out tomorrow, I figured I'll drop a quick guide on how team building works in Zenless Zone Zero so you're not going in blind. So every character in this game has 3 categories: a faction, an elemental type, and a specialty. So for example, Anby's faction here is the Cunning Hares, her elemental type is electric, and her specialty is stun. And then if we jump into Ben's profile here, we can see that he is from the Bellabog Industries. His elemental type is fire and his specialty is defense. So if we compare it to Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail, your elemental type is exactly that. Genshin has fire, hydro, electro, etc, while Honkai Star Rail has fire, ice, lightning, wind, and all that. Likewise, in Zenless Zone Zero, every character is going to fall into one of 5 possible elements. We've got physical, fire, ice, electric, and ether. And if I were to come up with a comparison on the way that these elements work, I would say that it's very similar to how break damage works in Honkai Star Rail, but instead of breaking down an enemy's toughness bar, you instead build up the elemental status to trigger a special effect based on the element. So the game refers to this as an anomaly, and here's a quick look at what each anomaly status does. So with physical, it triggers the assault and flinch status. So assault interrupts the enemy and deals physical damage, while flinch increases the daze that the target takes for a period of time. So daze is also known as stun, and it's a meter that builds up as enemies take damage. Once the daze meter is full, the enemy then gets stunned and it triggers a chain combo. Next up, we've got fire, and dealing enough fire damage builds up fire anomaly, which then triggers the burn effect. Burn is a damage over time, and if you land a burn on an organic enemy, so that's anything that's humanoid and not mechanical or energy based, it can then interrupt them. Ice anomaly build-up triggers both freeze and frostbite. So freeze is an immobilize, and when the effect ends, the enemy will then shatter, which deals ice damage to them and then also slows down their movement. Frostbite is the secondary effect, and it increases the amount of crit damage an enemy takes. Okay, then we've got electric anomaly. So maxing this out triggers the shock effect. So this is also a damage over time effect similar to burn, but this time it's more effective against mechanical type enemies, causing them to be interrupted. And then lastly, we've got ether. So ether anomaly build-up triggers the corruption effect, and once again, just like burn and electric, it applies a dot to the enemy, and if the enemies are of the energy variant, they will also get interrupted. Okay, so now what about specialty types? So once again, if I had to compare it with Genshin and Honkai Star Rail, then the specialty type is like weapon types in Genshin or paths in Honkai Star Rail. So your character's specialty dictates what weapons or light cones they can use, which in Zenless Zone Zero is known as W engines, and it can also give you a rough idea of how that character plays and what kind of role or niche they fulfill. So in Zenless Zone Zero, there are a total of 5 specialty categories. Agents can fall into either attack, stun, anomaly, support, or defense. Attack agents are pretty self-explanatory. These are usually going to be your main damage dealers. They're the ones that you have on field most of the time, and most team comps will be running at least one attack agent. Stun agents are going to be really useful in this game. They're going to be staple teammates for attackers that can make use of the stun status. So in Zenless Zone Zero, once enemies take enough daze damage, it results in a stun which does 3 things. First, it stuns them. They stop moving and you're free to DPS them down. But then secondly, it also causes them to take additional damage while they're in that stunned state. And then finally, it's also going to trigger a chain combo, which lets you swap in a character and have them deal a bunch of damage. So this is perfect, as this is obviously going to be your chance to bring in your attack agent to make use of not only the fact that the enemy is immobile, but also the bonus stun damage. Certain agents can make use of stuns more than others, so for example, someone like Nikomata, who is an attack agent, deals bonus damage while hitting enemies from behind, so she's going to love the fact that the enemies are standing still. But let's say you've got her first talent, Constellation or Eidolon. Against stun enemies, she'll also ignore 16% of enemy resistances, and then all attacks are considered back attacks. Okay, so now onto anomaly types. So we spoke about anomaly build-ups previously, and anomaly agents are characters that excel at applying these anomalies. These characters are perfect for teams that want to build around rapidly applying a bunch of anomalies, and Grace Howard is going to be a good example of an anomaly character. So you can see here that in her kit, she deals both physical and electric damage, and her core passive lets her increase her electric anomaly build-up up to a whopping 65% when you hit 8 stacks. And then we've got support characters, which obviously play a more supportive role. So currently in Zenless Zone Zero, there are no healers as of version 1.0, so the support class is more based around buffing allies or grouping and crowd controlling enemies. So an example of a team buffer is someone like Rena. Her core passive increases the team's damage penetration stat by up to 35% whenever she sends her puppets out to attack. So her gameplay is focused more around launching these puppets out and then triggering chain combos to swap on the on-field DPS. On the other side of things, we've got support characters like Nicole, who fall more into the crowd control category. Her attacks has her launch a black hole that pulls enemies in together while also debuffing their defense. And then lastly, we have the defense type. So in this game so far, there's only one defense type character, and that's Ben. So from what I can gather, these are going to be defense specialists that you can reactively swap in to tank big hits. So Ben is a counter-attack specialist, and he excels at perfect blocking and then rerouting that damage back onto the enemy. So having someone like Ben on the team is going to be great for when you come up against big enemies with multi-hitting attacks that can't be easily dodged. Okay, so we've covered elements and we've covered specialty. So what about factions? This is an entirely new category that doesn't have any comparisons to Genshin or Honkai Star Rail. Every character in the game so far will be part of a faction. So for example, if we filter by the Cunning Hairs, we've got Nico Amara, Billy Kid, Anby, and Nicole. While Victoria Housekeeping Company has Von Lycaon, the Werewolf Butler, and the 3 housekeeping maids, Corin, Ellen, and Rena. So these factions aren't just for lore. They actually play a pivotal role in team building as well, so let's take a look at how this works. Every character in Zenless Zone Zero has an additional ability that is locked behind team building. So Von Lycaon's ability, for example, increases his stun damage multiplier for the entire squad by 35% after he hits a stunned enemy. So this ability is only unlocked if Von Lycaon is partied with at least one character who shares either an attribute/element or a faction. And this goes for every character on the roster. So when building a team, not only do we want to make sure that the team's specialties and skills work well with each other, we also want to make sure that they are all contributing to activating one another's additional abilities. Now, it's easy enough if you just run 3 characters from the same faction, as they're all going to activate the abilities for each other simply by being part of the same faction. On the team page here, we can see these smiley icons in the corner that denote that these abilities are active for these characters. And then clicking on the icon in the top right corner here is also going to show you what additional abilities are active. But what if we don't have or don't want characters in the same faction, or if these characters don't actually work well with each other? So this is still going to be possible if we match up the element of the characters. So an example of such a team could be something like Anton, Anby, and Rena. We've got Anton, who's part of the Bellawog Industries, Anby, who is from the Cunning Hairs, and Rena, who's from Victoria Housekeeping. But because they're all electric type characters, you still activate all 3 abilities. And then of course we can also have a mishmash of this and have some characters activate abilities through elements, and then other characters activating abilities via factions with another. So for example, if I wanted to play Corin as my attacker, and have Sokaku as my support character, we can see here that none of their abilities are active since they're in 2 different factions, and they also don't share matching elements. So that means that in my last slot, I either need to have a physical character from the Hollow Special Operations faction, or an ice character from the Victoria Housekeeping Company faction. And then I also want to take into account that Corin is an attacker and Sokaku is a support character, so ideally in that 3rd slot I either want a stun character or perhaps an anomaly or defensive character. So with the characters that I have on my roster here, Lycaon is going to slot in perfectly here. He's a stun character, which means that I'm now running an optimal team of attack, support, and stun. And then he's also an ice character, which activates Sokaku's ability, and he's from the Victoria Housekeeping faction, which activates Corin's ability. And so I hope what I've shown here clears some things up regarding team building for Zenless Zone Zero. I'm really looking forward to the game, and I will be dipping my toes into character guides for it, so hopefully I can count on you guys' support.